The lighter is arriving very soon, so let's go over his kit and some of his potential teams, as well as whether he's the right character for your account. Let's start with Lighter's kit. He's a fire stun character who buffs both fire and ice damage and has flexible field time. His main mechanic is through the morale gauge under his health bar. Morale can be gained by attacking with any character on field. When enough is built up, Lighter triggers a quick assist, allowing him to come on field and basic attack until the 5th hit, which activates morale burst and loops his basic attacks, dealing a lot of days build up. Pretty simple, right? Lighter also has his EX special, which is an iframe that does a decent amount of days, as well as his ult and chain attack, which isn't important right now, but his ult will be useful for days build up once we get the upcoming decibel and ult changes that allows every character to charge their ult separately. Lighter's dodge acts similar to Xian's suppression mode dodge and Bernice's EX special dodge, allowing him to reposition without ending his combo. You can also perform this dodge and immediately follow up with his EX special. The Lighter increases stun duration by 3 seconds and also brings a lot of damage to the team, with a 15% ice and fire res shred, as well as an ice and fire damage boost, up to 75% depending on his impact stat. Combat impact will be applied to this damage buff, so at max stacks you should be able to hit 60% damage with his best free to play option, and 70% damage with his signature W engine's additional combat impact passive. Speaking of his W engine, if you do decide to pick it up, you can increase the crit damage of ice and fire attacks by an additional 30% on top of the 25% combat impact that it provides. His best free to play alternative is Steam Oven, giving him a 25.6% combat impact boost, which increases both his days build-up and his buffing potential, despite having a 50% energy regen main stat that isn't the most useful for him. Other options like Lycan's W engine only give him a 40% damage buff, but does increase his days output. Compared to his signature though, both of these options are a reduction in days output and team damage. Let's move on to the rest of his build. Your main skills to focus on are his basic attack and core passive, since these are responsible for most of your days build-up. His special is useful too, but you won't need to prioritize it. His ult will have similar value once we get individual ult meters. As with most stun characters, his dodge and assist are a lower priority, but are worth getting to at least 9 for their days multiplier increases. His best force set is of course Shockstar Disco, with your choice of Swing Jazz, Inferno Metal or Hormone Punk as your 2 set. For main stats, you want to run Impact Disc 6 above all else, since the remaining main stats and substats are only for increasing Lighter's personal damage. I would opt for Crit Rate Disc 4 and Attack Percent or Fire Damage Disc 5. Your individual stats will determine which is better, but generally the higher Lighter's impact and fire damage buff, the more likely attack percent will be better. As for substats, you can focus on crit and attack percent, but again, these are lower priority since they only increase Lighter's personal damage and not his buffing or stunning power. Before we go over his teams, let's take a look at his cinemas. His C1 increases his stun duration extension from 3 seconds to 5 seconds, while also increasing his ice and fire res shred to 25%. Not a crazy damage increase, but definitely a nice boost against neutral or resistant matchups. C2 has a bit more power with a 25% stun damage multiplier increase, as well as boosting his ice and fire damage buff to 120% of the original. His C4 is pretty interesting, boosting the energy regen for his allies while he's both on and off the field, but not really by a significant enough amount that I would pull it for utility purposes. His C6 adds more personal damage to his heavy strikes and increases his morale recovery time by 200%. Honestly, none of his cinemas really stand out as insane performance increases. I would recommend base copy plus his signature W engine for most players. C1 and 2 are considerations for further investment if you really like Lighter, but I personally wouldn't recommend them. Now, if you've gotten to this point in the video, you probably already know that Lighter has 2 main team options: fire teams and ice teams. Anywhere that you currently run Kaleido or Lycan, you could definitely slot Lighter in. However, that really only leaves us with Soldier 11, Ellen, and maybe Miyabi and Bernice, depending on how Miyabi's passive looks. This puts Lighter in a really weird position in the meta, because Ellen's current best team is with Lycan and Caesar, so replacing Lycan with Lighter means that you won't get Ellen's synergy passive activated. Her passive is only a 30% damage increase, so it won't be missed when Lighter is able to buff her ice damage by significantly more, but it's something to keep in mind. Alternatively, if you don't have Caesar, Sukaku is a decent option for some additional attack and ice damage, but she does lack the shielding and anti-interrupt that Ellen really enjoys having. You could also consider running Lycan and Lighter together. You should have really high stun up time at the expense of potential shielding. For certain matchups, this could end up being Ellen's best team, although you may need to give her an attack percent disc 5 to make up for the lack of Caesar or Sukaku's 1k attack buff and balance out the significant damage percent increases. As for Soldier 11, she keeps getting buffs and support options that keep her relevant, quite the opposite of Nekomata, our other standard attack character. Since Obol Squad isn't out yet, I would expect Soldier 11 to maintain her meta relevance going forward, especially if you combine her with Lighter and Caesar. Lighter is a bigger upgrade over Collator than Lycan, so I would expect Soldier 11 mains to get the most value out of him. I would still expect Soldier 11 to perform slightly worse than our limited DPS characters on average, but an upgrade in Lighter does close the gap. If you have Lighter's W engine, you may need to switch Soldier 11's Disc 5 to attack percent if you were running 5 at damage previously, even if you have Caesar. Again, this will be purely dependent on your individual stats, so I would recommend testing this out yourself if you care about getting the most optimal build. We don't know much for sure about Miyabi at this stage. However, she is likely to be a crit scaling anomaly character, since the Ice anomaly provides a 10% crit damage boost. With that in mind, it may mean that she could have some synergy with Lighter. That would also explain why he randomly buffs both Fire and Ice. As for Bernice, the only time I see her having synergy with Lighter is if we get an Ice anomaly character who appreciates stun, but also values Bernice's sub DPS role over an additional support. So, should you pull Lighter? I think he's the type of character that's perfect to pick up on a rerun. Right now, he has very limited DPS options that he can support, so I don't see him having a significant meta relevance right now. However, if you are still running Soldier 11 or Ellen, or maybe you just really like him, Lighter is a great pickup who I expect to age relatively well. If you do happen to use Lycan and you're going to be a bit short on resources to raise Lighter, you could actually pick up Lighter's W engine instead. This will be a team damage increase and Lycan's best in slot, even though it is a 5 to 6% reduction in his day's output. If you're planning on picking up Lighter, let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and sub if you want to see more. Anyway, I'll see you later.